It flew twice the speed of sound back in 1976, and yet today not a single passenger plane on Earth can match it. How did we build a machine that outran the sun and then decide never to do it again? In the jet age of the 1950s and 60s, the world was obsessed with speed. The Cold War was roaring and national pride was measured in miles per hour. Britain and France, two nations that couldn't agree on how to make tea, suddenly joined forces. The goal? Build a plane so advanced it would make rockets jealous.
And they did. The result was Concorde, a word that literally means harmony. More than 5,000 engineers, over 10 years of trial and error, and $2.8 billion later, they finally created it. The final cost? Over 6 times the original estimate. Each Concorde, by the time it rolled out in 1976, cost a jaw-dropping $39 million. That's about $275 million in today's money. The project was so expensive that at one point both governments nearly pulled the plug. Still, they pressed on. Why? Because Concorde was a statement, a declaration that Europe too could reach for the stars. Only 20 Concordes were ever built, and just 14 of them carried passengers. Sleek and needle-nosed, it looked less like a passenger plane and more like a fighter jet that decided to go to a black tie event. Celebrities, royals, CEOs, everyone wanted that seat. Concorde could take you from London to New York in just 3.5 hours, while most planes took 8 long hours to cross the Atlantic. Breakfast in London, lunch in Manhattan, no teleportation needed. Concorde's first flight was in 1969, and it entered commercial service in 1976. Faster than sound, rarer than diamonds. In 27 years, it flew thousands of flawless supersonic journeys. Even now, no passenger jet has matched its speed or elegance. Up there, above 56,000 feet, Concorde had its own highways, exclusive lanes in the sky. No other plane dared to share them. Regular jets used North Atlantic tracks, routes constantly redrawn by changing weather patterns and jet streams. But Concorde's world was calm, stable, predictable. Its dedicated supersonic transport tracks were fixed, with only minor adjustments for weather or military activity. It wasn't just ahead of its time, it left time behind. Concorde was undeniably beautiful, sleek, narrow, and possibly long. Its famous drooping nose? Pure engineering genius. It tilted down during takeoff and landing so pilots could actually see the runway. Then lifted back up mid-flight, like a swan raising its head. At full throttle, its 4 Rolls-Royce Snecma Olympus engines glowed orange, spitting fire like a mechanical phoenix. Its aluminum skin stretched and expanded by nearly 10 inches from the heat, like a creature cooling down after flying too close to the sun. At Mach 2.04, 1,354 miles per hour, Concorde cruised twice as fast as the speed of sound. At 60,000 feet, passengers could see the curvature of the Earth, and even the darkness of space creeping in above the blue horizon. Pilots described flying it as like holding lightning in your hands. And honestly, who wouldn't want to do that, at least once?
And speaking of the sky, that came with an unexpected twist: radiation. At that altitude, cosmic rays were almost twice as strong as those faced by passengers on subsonic jets. Early scientists even wondered, could frequent Concorde flyers face higher risks of skin cancer? Thankfully, the answer wasn't as frightening as it sounded. Because Concorde was so fast, passengers spent far less time exposed to the elements. The total radiation dose for a transatlantic trip was usually lower than on a regular long-haul flight. Still, safely came first. On the flight deck sat a radiometer, a tiny guardian against the invisible. It measured radiation levels constantly, and if things got too intense, say during unusual solar activity, the pilots would simply lower their altitude below 47,000 feet to stay safe.
Sometimes I think about what the world lost when Concorde stopped flying. We traded speed for efficiency, glamour for caution. Even the smallest details were extraordinary. The cockpit was small, dense with instruments, and hot. Some equipment surfaces and panels could reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit during cruise due to compression heat. Pilots joked it was the only office in the world where you could get a tan while wearing a tie. The flight deck had hundreds of instruments, analog, precise, and intimidatingly beautiful. To fly it, you had to be exceptional. Only the best of the best ever touched that yoke. Training was brutal, the technology unforgiving. So what was it really like to fly this legend? Inside the cockpit, it wasn't just the captain and first officer. Concorde needed a flight engineer, the unsung hero who constantly monitored a maze of gauges, switches, and dials. Their job was to keep the jet's intricate systems perfectly balanced, especially its fuel. Captain John Hutchinson once said, "The airplane was an absolute delight to fly," marveling that it was designed in the late 1950s and yet still unmatched in the 21st century. I love that thought. How something born in the age of black and white TV could still outpace modern dreams. From the 1970s through the early 2000s, Concorde was a stage where world leaders, celebrities, and royalty performed their sky-high diplomacy. French presidents Georges Pompidou, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, and François Mitterrand turned Concorde into a flying embassy. And across the Channel, Britain had its own version of high-speed royalty. Queen Elizabeth II herself took Concorde for her Silver Jubilee trip to Barbados in 1977, and later for journeys to the Middle East and the US. Even prime ministers, Heath, Callaghan, Thatcher, Major, and Blair, couldn't resist. But perhaps the most surreal passenger of all? Pope John Paul II in 1989. You can't help but wonder, what did he think? Gazing out that small window, watching the curve of the Earth while cruising at 60,000 feet. Tickets cost about $12,000 round trip back in the late 90s. That's more than $22,000 today. You weren't just paying for speed, you were buying your way into a very small, very exclusive club. Your seatmate might be Paul McCartney, Princess Diana, or someone who owned both a yacht and the company that built it. It flew celebrities, royals, and power players. Mick Jagger, Elton John, Phil Collins. The last famously performed in both London and Philadelphia on the same day for Live Aid in 1985 thanks to Concorde's speed.
Inside though, the cabin was modest by today's luxury standards. No lie-flat beds, no TV screens the size of a wall, just fine leather seats, real silverware, and good wine. Yet, for all its glamour, Concorde wasn't profitable overall. Air France consistently struggled to make it financially viable. However, British Airways did make it profitable for most of the 1990s until 2000. But high maintenance costs, tiny passenger capacity, and fuel thirst that would make a rocket blush kept it in the skies more for pride than profit. And here's one of my favorite parts. There was no first class, no business class. Everyone on board was treated like royalty. Each passenger was a VIP, sipping champagne and dining on caviar as the plane streaked across the stratosphere. There was an unspoken understanding that if you were on Concorde, you didn't need labels. The experience itself was first class.
Concorde didn't just serve leaders, it celebrated humanity's boldest moments. It made special appearances at air shows. Farnborough, Paris-Le Bourget, Oshkosh, Mox, where crowds would literally feel the sonic heartbeat as it roared past. It performed at Zurich Airport's anniversary in 1998 and carried the Olympic flame for the 1992 Winter Games in Albertville. In 1973, it chased a total solar eclipse across Africa, staying a record-breaking 74 minutes in the moon's shadow, the longest observation of an eclipse in human history, all because of its speed. But not every flight made headlines. In the early 1980s, rumors circulated that a Concorde charter flight was arranged for a Middle Eastern royal family. No names, no flags, no photos. The cabin crew signed non-disclosure agreements, the aircraft flew under a disguised flight number, and the details remain sealed to this day. Some said it was Saudi royalty. Others whispered about secret peace talks, and nothing was ever verified. But then came the Concorde wedding flight, a charter arranged for a millionaire who proposed mid-air and married upon landing. The priests, the rings, even the champagne flutes had their own boarding passes. In a world obsessed with luxury, Concorde offered something rare, a sense of wonder. But behind the glitter and gossip, there was tension, always. Every flight was a balancing act between speed, safety, and cost. One wrong gauge reading and the world's fastest jet would sit grounded, sulking in its hangar. Maintenance was an art form. After every flight, mechanics checked thousands of components, inspecting for thermal expansion cracks, wear, or fuel system shifts. Each Concorde had over 200,000 parts, and nearly every one required individual inspection. Fuel was another story. On a London to New York round trip, Concorde consumed around 160 tons of fuel, enough to fill a swimming pool. At full throttle, it burned a gallon every 2 seconds. I burned through coffee slower than that. To keep its engines efficient, it climbed in steps, ascending higher as its weight decreased. And the heat? Oh, it was extreme. Its nose reached 250 degrees Fahrenheit mid-flight. The iconic white coating wasn't just for looks. It was a special heat-reflective paint that protected its structure from temperatures above 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Without it, it'd blister like a tourist in Miami. When it roared into the sky, people stopped in the streets just to watch. Its afterburners lit the horizon like fireworks, its thunder echoing across the Atlantic. Concorde even had its own well-known flight number, BA001, a route so famous it became a cultural symbol in its own right.
But glory always has a shadow. For Concorde, it was the sonic boom, a shockwave that rattled windows and patients alike. For this reason, Concorde was banned from supersonic overland flights in most countries. Its routes were limited to transoceanic flights, primarily between London, Paris, and New York, and occasionally Barbados. Still, the engineers dreamed of going further. Soon after the first Concorde began to fly, a new model, the Concorde B, was quietly drawn on the drafting labels of British and French designers. It would have carried more fuel, had bigger wings, with leading-edge slats. And those engines, oh, they were going to be something else. Quieter, cleaner, and 25% more efficient than those that powered the original Concorde. That version would have had 500 extra miles of range, opening new routes, new dreams, new horizons. But then came the oil crisis of the 1970s. Fuel prices soared, airlines tightened their belts. And the dream of Concorde B, like so many bold ideas, was quietly shelved. The sky's most beautiful machine became a victim of its own ambition.
Every legend has its hidden heroes. For Concorde, they were the engineers. Men and women who looked at gravity and said, "Nah, not today." Beneath its elegant exterior lay one of the most complex systems ever built for civil aviation. To fly at Mach 2, Concorde's designers had to rewrite the rules of flight, literally. Normally, airplanes slow down as they climb. Concorde, it did the opposite. The higher it went, the faster it flew. But that created problems. As the air thinned, stability decreased. So its creators invented something no one had ever tried: a moving center of gravity. Fuel was constantly pumped between the nose and tail tanks to balance the aircraft mid-flight. It was a mostly manual dance. The flight engineer monitored gauges and transferred fuel by hand, working alongside the pilots as they read a wall of analog dials and felt the aircraft respond like a living creature. But behind the engineering miracle was something bigger. What many don't realize is that Concorde's existence was also political. It was the West's answer to the Soviet Tupolev Tu-144, nicknamed the Concordski. Yes, the Soviets actually beat it to the sky. But speed isn't everything. The Tu-144 was rushed, unstable, and after a few fiery crashes, quietly grounded. Concorde, meanwhile, continued to fly. Its success was proof that democracy and collaboration could outfly competition and secrecy. Of course, not everyone played fair. According to various sources, Soviet spies got their hands on secret blueprints from factories in Toulouse and Bristol. But even with the stolen data, they couldn't match its grace. You can copy a shape, not a soul. Then came July 25, 2000. A warm afternoon in Paris. Air France Flight 4590 was preparing to depart from Charles de Gaulle Airport, bound for New York. As it thundered down the runway, tragedy struck. A thin strip of titanium, accidentally left on the runway by another aircraft, burst one of Concorde's tires. A piece of rubber flew up, rupturing a fuel tank in the wing. Flames erupted. Within seconds, the world's most beautiful machine became a fireball. The crew tried desperately to climb, but the left engine failed, and the aircraft crashed in a hotel near Gonesse. 113 lives lost. It was Concorde's first and only fatal accident, but it cracked something deeper: our faith in its invincibility. Investigators found that aging systems and fragile fuel tanks couldn't survive another decade without massive upgrades. Both fleets were grounded. Concorde returned briefly after modifications, but the world had changed. The 9/11 attacks in 2001 hit global air travel hard, and passenger confidence never fully recovered. Rising maintenance costs, noise restrictions, and environmental concerns sealed Concorde's fate. On October 24, 2003, British Airways flew Concorde home for the last time. New York to London, BA 002. Its final commercial flight was emotional. Crowds lined the runways, waving flags and wiping tears as the silver bird descended one last time. And then, it was over. Humanity had gone supersonic, and then willingly slowed down again.
2 decades after its retirement, engineers still study Concorde's blueprints like sacred texts. NASA used its flight data for high-altitude research, and its aerodynamics design influenced military jets and even new commercial concepts. Because the dream never really died, today companies like Boom Supersonic and Spike Aerospace are trying again, chasing Mach 2 without the boom, speed without guilt, power without pollution. The Boom Overture, if it succeeds, will carry 80 passengers at Mach 1.7 on net zero carbon fuel. And if you look at its nose, yeah, it's pure Concorde DNA.
Even grounded, it refuses to fade away. You can still visit it. Bristol, Paris, New York, Washington, Manchester. Walk under those wings and you feel it. That quiet hum of human pride. So let me ask you, did we give up too soon? Maybe that question will ignite the next leap forward, because Concorde's story isn't over. It just paused at Mach 2. And every legend leaves behind whispers, especially Concorde, which has a whole storm of them. Beneath its mirror-bright skin of luxury lies a trail of rumors, half-truths, and pub stories told by engineers who probably shouldn't have ordered that third pint in Bristol. Some say that during the Cold War, NATO eyed Concorde not as a luxury jet, but as a hush-hush courier. Imagine, top-secret documents, microfilm, maybe even a briefcase handcuffed to someone's wrist, racing across the Atlantic faster than any spy plane alive. At 60,000 feet and twice the speed of sound, it could outrun most fighter jets of its day. Sounds plausible, right? Except, no proof. No files, no flight logs. British Airways and Air France still deny everything. And every pilot asked just smiled and changed the subject. Coincidence or covert history? Then there's the royal rumor, my personal favorite. They say one Concorde secretly carried Queen Elizabeth II's correspondence to Washington during a diplomatic standoff. No press, no fanfare, just the most regal mail delivery in history. Is it true? No one knows. It's a charming myth, unverified of course, but perfectly fitting for the world's most majestic machine. And then comes the real rabbit hole. Concorde 03X. Some insiders whisper that beyond the 20 official jets, there was a classified prototype, longer range, stealth-coded, designed for government testing. Others claim it never left the hangar. A few aviation historians point to sketches stored in British archives showing a Concorde-like airframe with unusual wing sweep and modified engines. Could this have been the embryo of a military Concorde? Perhaps, but again, no official evidence. Like all good myths, it lives on in the space between curiosity and imagination. Now here's what is confirmed. NASA studied Concorde inside out after its retirement. Agency's archives contain data from joint British-French experiments in the late 90s, testing ozone layers, contrails, and high-altitude chemistry. Were those just environmental tests, or something more? Maybe the answers to the next generation of supersonic flight are still locked in a vault somewhere in Langley. But let's dream for a second. What if all that data had been used differently? What if Concorde's story hadn't ended there? Could we have seen it reborn with hybrid engines and sustainable fuel? Technically, yes. Economically, not a chance. Each flight needed a small army of engineers, far more than any modern airliner just to prep one takeoff.
Engineers explored ideas for a future Concorde featuring composite materials, improved fuel efficiency, and reduced noise. They never materialized, but fragments of those designs resurfaced decades later in next-gen concepts. In a way, Concorde didn't fail, it simply belonged to a future that hadn't arrived yet. Now a new generation is trying to bring it back, all chasing the same dream. Speed without the scream, power without pollution. They're building jets that might break the sound barrier quietly. Concorde wasn't perfect. It was expensive, loud, and high maintenance. And who knows, next time you hear thunder high above, don't rush to close the window. It might not be a storm, it might just be Concorde, whispering through the clouds, reminding us that once we dared to fly faster than time itself. If stories like this fascinate you, don't stop here. On our channel, you'll find more, from hidden tunnels beneath cities to the engineering marvels that changed history. Concorde may have retired, but adventure never does.